Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about leadership, clear communication. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was great. I don't actually know if I mentioned this last week, but I'm completely obsessed with a new show called For All Mankind.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, it's so good. And it's a very slow burn at the beginning. And then now it's but last night I watched the end of season 2 and I literally gasped about 4 times. And I was actually awesome. Shaken up after the episode. It's not scary, but it's just so emotional. I was like, oh my God, it's very good. And I'm very excited. I think I've talked to you about this before. I really like kind of science fiction-y, alternate history stuff if it's really good world building. And this is excellent. Really consistent and excellent. So with really great characters. So I'm all in.
Now, do they make it clear when it's the alternate history? What are the differences?
No, and there was something last night I had to Google where I was like, did that happen in real life? I don't actually know. I mean, the stuff about that's happening on the moon, you're clearly okay, this is... But they sprinkle in other stuff. Ted Kennedy didn't go to that weekend event where there was a scandal that ruined his career, so he ends up being stuff like that is just kind of sprinkled in, and it's not really obvious. It's just sort of in the background. Yeah. But it's funny because it's all... So we also, complete side note, have this cat who is menacing our cats.
Oh no, a neighbor cat?
Oh my God. This cat is could not care less. So if I clap at him he does not care. So I've had to take a water pistol. And sometimes I've been out the back garden in my dressing gown with the water. Anyway, it's not glamorous trying to keep our cat safe, but there we go.
It sounds fun, though. I mean, maybe not for you, but for anyone seeing you with the water gun.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they're having a blast. They're delighted. Who's the crazy neighborhood lady? That's me. But how was your week?
Oh, my week was good. I also wanted to talk about a TV show, Samurai Gourmet. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, I haven't heard of any of it, no.
It's so fun. It's this guy who just retired, and he's, kind of figuring out what he's doing. And he really is into tasting good food. And so he goes places, and he's like, should I go into this restaurant? Let me try it. And the thing that's so awesome about him is that when the food comes and it's good, he just savors it. He's like, let me taste this. Oh, it's really good. Okay, I'll taste this. And he puts his book aside, or he just focuses on what he's doing.
Sounds very relaxing.
Very relaxed, and a good reminder to savor the moment and whatever it is that I'm doing right now. And then there's always some problem that he runs into where he needs to ask someone to quiet down or something because they're disturbing everybody, and he's kind of nervous. I don't know. I don't really want to ask someone to quiet down. Right, but then he remembers the samurai, and what would the samurai do, and he imagines what the samurai would do in this situation, and that helps him decide what to do. So it's nice.
Wow, that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Is it fiction or is it a documentary type reality?
No, it's fiction. It's
okay.
Yeah, it's kind of unusual. It's not like your classic story structure. Each episode is its own thing, kind of, and it's him doing something that day, and it's going to involve eating something tasty, and it's going to involve some decision or tough minor social situation, and then he's going to think about how the samurai does it and then decide what to do.
Wow, that is very cool.
It's fun.
Yeah, I love that. The Great British Baking Show has started here.
Oh my gosh, can't wait for it to come here.
I know, it's very exciting, and the girls watch it too now, so that's very
awesome.
exciting. And so, yeah, but it's sort of like a national event, so I've been I didn't get to watch it when it was on, so I have been kind of trying to plug my ears and not hear anything accidentally about it, so yeah, I'll have to keep that careful with that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Don't Google anything.
No, I know. Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
So today, well, first let me tell you my quote. So my quote...
Oh, sorry, yes.
No, it's fine. My quote is from this book about writing novels that I was reading recently. It's called Refuse to be Done, How to Write and Rewrite a Novel in 3 Drafts by Matt Bell. And he was talking about, how he's giving you his structure of how he likes to write novels, but of course it might be different for you. And then he was also saying that he's confident that he's therefore passing along some of his own blind spots, but he's tried really hard to address those. And so the quote is, "One goal of all good teachers has to be not to pass on their own lacks to their students." And I read that and was like, whoa, I haven't thought about that before.
Wow.
That's kind of a good idea. I haven't ever really explicitly said, what am I not good at, and how can I avoid giving my students that same problem,
I wonder, though, do you do it a bit automatically?
How? What do you mean?
Well, I guess I immediately am thinking my biggest problem as a student was speaking in class. Like, I would just never, ever do that. So that's something, like, I kind of go over the top about. Kind of, you know what I mean? So,
cool.
But then there's other stuff, I'm sure, that it goes the other way. But yeah, I wonder, because are you just inherently aware of what you struggle with?
That's a really good point. And whatever your struggles were, maybe you've already integrated things into the classroom. I think that's probably true. I just haven't ever explicitly thought about it. And I was just thinking that probably connecting students with people who are good at whatever things I'm not good at would be a useful thing to think about. But you're right. I'm sure that some of it happens naturally with just how we structure the classroom.
I wonder, we should do an episode that's like our foibles as students. Do you know what I mean? What were the things that kind of tripped us up? And then how do we... Yeah, that would be interesting.
Because for me, it was definitely... If I wrote off the class... I would write off the class really early and be like, not interested. Wow. Or like, not go talk to the faculty member or anything. So, and you're right. I do try to continually provide points for people to re-engage with the class. And
you have talked about that a lot. That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Can I tell you something funny about what we're talking about today? Well, maybe it's just because I wrote someone an email, and then I was like, I wonder, like, they never replied to that email. And then I went back and read it and realized there was no question in it or anything. I was like, oh, okay. This is that thing that I don't want to do. But anyway, so yeah.
And that's so cool. And we've talked about this before. The thing, if people don't reply the way you expected them to, then it's good to look back and say, what did I say? I must have not, something went wrong in that communication.
But you have that ethos about so many things, and it has become a bit of a what would Claire do for me.
Cool.
Do you know what I mean? In things where I'm just like annoyed with people, and then I'm like, what would Claire? And like I feel like you would be like, okay, but why did they do it that way, or why didn't they? And I'm like, okay.
I feel like that's the first step is like annoyance that they didn't do the thing you wanted, and then the second step for me is to say, well, why didn't they? And then usually the third step is like, oh, I'll try this other way. Not always, but sometimes it becomes clear what the problem might be.
Totally. I think it's very helpful. But so we're talking about communication today. And in my head, I've framed a lot of it through email. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, that's perfectly okay. Email is a lot of leadership communication these days, so I think that makes sense. Yeah, and actually, the first thing I was thinking about was our chair of our department is really great at sending emails. And I am always impressed how whenever he sends an email, it's very clear to me what he wants of us. And it's usually really easy to either do it or to start doing it or to provide, the initiation cost in doing whatever it is, he's made it small. And that is really effective at getting me to actually do whatever it is. So, he's clear on what he's asking us. So it's like, is he letting us know something, in which case I don't have to do anything but just have it in my mind? Or is he asking for feedback and ideas? Or is he asking us to add something to a document he's working on? He does that a lot. He'll draft something and say, hey, this is a departmental document. Will you go look at it, add your thoughts? That's really easy. You just read through what he wrote. You say, oh, here's some other thoughts. This sentence confused me. I suggest this sentence, and that's great.
See, even the thing of writing the document, I think is so great, because if it's like, can everyone contribute something, it's just...
Right.
It's so much easier to edit something.
Right. If he starts it, it's much easier for people to contribute than if it's like blank. Yeah, I totally agree. So that's very effective. I agree. So I often find, because it's so helpful to be explicit about what you're asking of somebody, I often find when I'm writing emails, if I stop and think, what am I asking them? Often I find I don't know. I'm I'm like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to give this information and then I wanted them to do this. Like, but when I stop and say, what do I want out of them? Then it becomes really easy to write it so that they can tell what I want out of it, you know? So that's kind of the first step, is figuring out the first step is asking myself, what do I want from the people that I'm sending this email to? And then from there, everything usually falls into place. Yeah. And then I guess the other, so while he's doing all this, he usually has really short and to the point emails that are very clear and also are friendly. And I feel like I always try to do those things too. And I'm thinking about it from both sides. I appreciate getting the short, clear, friendly emails, and I try to send the short, clear, friendly emails. If I can make it shorter, that's usually better. And another thing, just to continue on with this chair's excellent communication with emails, oftentimes it seems like as chair, you need to forward emails to the faculty. You get an email, and you're like,
yes,
let me just forward this to you. And I really, really, really appreciate it when the forwarded emails have an explanation about why they're forwarding it, about why they decided to forward it, about what they expect, again, us to do. What takeaway are they hoping I'm going to get from it? Do they want a response? So it's just the same thing of being explicit about the purpose of the email and the expectations from it. And it shouldn't be long. Just a little sentence of, oh, we're going to discuss this at our next meeting, wanted you to see it, or if anyone's interested in doing this, here you go. And then I can immediately say, oh, not interested, delete, or whatever it is.
Totally. And friend of the pod, Bori, is like, that's the first time I really experienced that, where someone forwards something with, I think this might be interesting to you because, and it's like, then I read it. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. This does sound interesting to me. But it's just like, we have such, it sounds ridiculous, but we have such a high demand on our time in terms of emails. You do need some motivation to read a thing that's forwarded. And I think even it's been shown, I said with no basis, I don't know like what that's based on, but like students often don't read stuff with forward in the title, in the subject line.
That's
and so sometimes even changing
but
that
does make sense.
Oh, yeah, and I know I'm like, whatever. If as soon as I see that, and if there's no explanation, then I don't engage with it at all. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's see. I have a few other topics. Let's see.
So can I tell you something?
Yeah,
sorry.
Please do.
Well, it's just funny because when I was reflecting on all of this, it had never occurred to me that writing an email was something you would think about or plan or have any feelings about until working with you on that project we did together.
Cool.
And you would write these great emails and really reflect on, again, instead of being like, well, they're a bunch of jerks when they don't reply, you're like, oh, I wonder why. And I was like, oh, like emails are a thing, like we're doing. It's just, I don't know why that has never occurred to me. And I remember, this is how old I am, but in school, like we would learn to write letters to people. Do you know what I mean? And then when we were doing German, you would learn to write letters in German and whatever it was. And it's never been something that I've ever even thought about with emails. And,
it feels to me like we automatically think of emails for some reason as this extra thing that just slides into all the blank spaces, kind of like photocopying your exams or something that doesn't take any time, right? But then you're like, oh, it does actually. And so I think that is kind of contrast to writing a clear, communicating email, because that does take a minute,
Totally, and it also saves a minute.
It does, exactly.
But sorry, go back to what you were saying.
Wonderful. That's a really good point, that if you write the email clearly to begin with, then you get the effective response instead of having to go back and forth a whole bunch of times and wasting a bunch of people's time. That's a really good point. And I also think about it sometimes when I'm writing emails and I'm like, am I spending too long on this email? I try to think, and I think this is true, I'm practicing writing effective emails.
Nice.
And so I'm kind of investing in being able to do it a little faster next time. And so I don't mind. And I really don't think I'm spending an inordinate amount of time on it, but I don't mind putting in a little extra time because it's not, I see it as an investment as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I just have a couple other topics within this, but do you want to jump in and say something, or should I go on to another one?
Either. So I was going to say, kind of like, I think, again, I've learned a lot of this from you. I think, I've learned this week I should have a question mark somewhere in my email if I want
Oh,
an answer.
yes. Uh-huh.
So that's like, and I think, yeah, I think the other thing that I've really gotten better at, because again, it's like, it's when you get an email from someone, like, enjoying it is not the word I'm looking for, but when it's effective and you're like, oh, yes, like the thing, having all of the relevant information in there, like dates, links to forms or sheets, even
Oh,
if
I
you've
love
already
the
sent it
links.
before.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
like,
Do the effort
because
to put it in, and then they don't have to do the effort. Every one of them.
totally,
Yeah.
no one wants to go. And it's just a little bit like, and it feels like professoring in the sense of like, there is times where you're like, well, why do I have to give you a list of topics for the exam? I've already told you what I want to, but it just makes things, it lowers the activation barrier. You know what I mean? And sure, like in the sense of justice and fairness in the world, you did already send that form.
Sure.
But just
Many
put it in
people
again.
hopefully already have it handy, but
Totally.
maybe they don't have it handy. And
No, and there's days when I'm just so fried having to go and search for some old email
oh, right.
will just like drive me crazy. And I love, and I'm not, this is in my working on more, but a subject line can change your life. Do you know what I mean? Like a really effective subject line. Like sometimes students send me the most beautiful subject lines where they'll put what class they're in, you know what I mean? And just like all of the information you need instead of being like, who's this guy again? And like, you know, that kind of thing. So that's super helpful. But
Oh,
I think,
love that. Subject lines. I haven't spent much time thinking about that. That's cool to hear that that's so meaningful. That's a good
yeah,
point.
it really, it can be helpful. And especially just like put in all of the dates and times, like looking forward to seeing you at the lab that is on the 17th of September at 9:30 a.m. or whatever it is, just to jog that
All the
memory.
dates and times. I love that.
Totally. I'm a big fan of salutations, and I'm a big not fan of no salutations. And it always, even when I do it sometimes, I find, and I don't know if this is your opinion, but I do the salutation, and then sometimes when I reply back,
Yes.
I will not do a salutation, which I think that's okay. Like that doesn't annoy me when people do that to me, but it annoys me when the first email.
Yeah. I feel like once we've had a back and forth, we're kind of now into the chatting zone, and maybe
Yes.
that's okay. So I do feel a little more loose about that. And sometimes I do want to say, thanks, Ruth. And so you don't want to say, hi, Ruth. Thanks, Ruth. You know? So like that's kind of a little... But yeah, I do think about that and add a salutation sometimes. But I do feel like it's a little bit loosey-goosey after the second email.
Maybe, okay, I'm going to put this, actually, I'm just putting this down on the later thing, but the other thing that has blown my world is the scheduled send. And I
love the scheduled send. Tell me more.
Well, I love it because, so I think, you know, there is a lot more of a movement in the world to respecting work-life balance and, you know, accepting that people should not necessarily be available after hours for things. And I think there's been times where I get late emails and I want to reply to show that I'm also working late. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like it's just perpetuating something. But one of my friends actually said, you know, they were told you're kind of creating a hostile work environment. If you're senior to anybody and you're sending out of hours emails, you're kind of creating this expectation.
Interesting.
And so just schedule it for the next day.
Right. If this is the time you're writing it, you can totally click send, but schedule send, and then the job is done from your perspective, but it's not going to arrive for them until whatever the right time is. I love that.
And I think for me, like if I get an email at 10 o'clock at night, I think I've talked about this on this podcast a million times, where I like kind of look at it on my phone.
Yeah.
And don't really deal with it. But if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm like, here I am at work time, and an email pops up, I'm like, oh, okay, I will deal with this right now. So I think even just in terms of effectiveness, it's better.
That's a really good point.
To schedule it. And there's definitely been at least one time where I've been like, I'm not going to send this email after all, and then go and retrieve
right.
it. And so,
sure.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You have a little bit of time to think about it. It's kind of like you having that 24-hour policy. After the exam is done, there's 24 hours where we can't talk about it, and then we'll talk about any, questions you have about your grade. But let everything simmer down. So anyway, you're writing the email, you're giving yourself, and then you can go back in and edit it, or decide you don't want to send it after all, or whatever.
Yeah, and it's funny, and I don't know if this is a deliberate thing, but I notice here, do you know automatic emails from the university that are just like, the pay period ends in 2 days or whatever? They don't come ever on the weekends or in the evenings, which I really, like, it actually matters. Like, you kind of feel less plugged in all the time, or I can't quite explain it. So
it totally does matter. Yeah. If you're going to have a bunch of emails pop in, that should happen during the day. That makes that. Yeah, I totally agree. So I love the schedule send idea, and that's great. Because if you happen to be working on it and you want to work on it at 8 p.m. on a whatever, then great, do it.
And that totally works for me, because sometimes I have to skip off and get the kids in the afternoon and come back, but I can do something after dinner. Do you know what I mean? But it shouldn't be normalized that you're doing that. Do you know what I mean? So I think that, and then the other thing, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, kind of in a structural sense, is having the out of hours or the out of office setting, which I often forget to do, but when I do it, I find it very effective and helpful.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. So I like those for sure.
Yeah. Now with the out of office, sometimes I worry about that's like the automatic response email that goes out and says I'm not here. I haven't set that up for my sabbatical because I don't want to be annoying to everybody who emails
every time. I know, because then I did it last year when I was off the whole year, and I was like, oh, that's got to get annoying. Like literally every email to the physics department is like, sorry, I'm not here, as if you didn't know.
But is there a setting or something that's like you only send the email if
there might be,
if it's sent directly to you and not to like a listserv? I
feel like there's definitely is settings, but I don't know what they are.
So maybe my concern is
okay.
unwarranted.
People out there listening to us, if you know how to do that, please let us know. But yeah, it would be handy, because then you don't want to leave someone hanging necessarily. But then I hear you. Like every time, that would get annoying. Yeah.
Well, let's see. I had one other thought, if I can share it, which is about asking for volunteers for a certain task. And
okay.
And I think we've all been in the situation where someone asks for volunteers. We need someone to do this. We'll have this awkward silence until the first person breaks and says, okay, I'll do it. And that's, just not really very pleasant. And one thing that I've seen some chairs do that I found really effective is to go and ask the people who you think would be good matches for whatever this task is before the meeting, where we're going to have that awkward silence. And then at the meeting, just see if anyone wants to join them. So you're still having it open if anyone wants to join, but you've already found some good matches. You've got the task under control.
And it's like you need that nucleation seed, right? Where
And then, so I really like that. And then I also was really impressed. I was in this group recently, and they sent out a little survey. This was a big group, but it was like, do people want to review proposals for us? Do people want to coordinate our meetings?
Nice.
Like what kinds of things, if any, you're not obligated to, but which kinds of things are you interested in getting involved within this community? And I really appreciated that, because I got to fill it out. And they even asked like, I'd like to do it, but I'm busy now, maybe in a couple years, or, that kind of thing. And so you just filled out this little survey if you wanted to. Again, you didn't have to, and so I was able to say, I'd love to review proposals for you guys anytime, but I don't really feel like helping organize the meeting. And so then they reached out and said, hey, do you want to review proposals? Because they knew that I was interested. And so that I thought was pretty darn cool. You're getting the input of who's interested in what, and then you go out and ask them individually, so they feel excited that they got asked individually, and it was something that fit with them. So I thought that was a pretty cool way of coordinating volunteers.
I love that, because also sometimes you're like, no, I don't want to, but then am I always going to be the person saying no? But if you have all the stuff laid out in front of you, you're like, sweet, I could totally contribute in that area, and then I feel good about saying no to the thing I don't necessarily want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I remember a time in our department where we were deciding who was going to coordinate the chemistry club for the next couple semesters, and I was committed that it wasn't going to be me. I'm interested in helping, but that's not what I'm going to help with. So, I'm not saying I don't want to do departmental volunteering. That's just not the right match for me.
I know, and I think it's so important that we acknowledge that, there's just different things.
Right,
and it's also such a waste to
exactly.
And there's a balance between pushing yourself to try new things and just doing something you're going to dread every second of.
Exactly. It really should be a good match. That's what that would be better for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love that of going and talking to people first.
Yeah.
And then And then it makes you feel special too.
It does.
When
It
people
does.
are
Hey,
like,
I thought
oh,
of
hey,
you.
I think you... Right. And even when you're like, I know you're kind of manipulating me, but it's okay. It's working. I do feel special. So that's great.
And if you're in this one-on-one setting, I mean, it depends the relationship and the hierarchy and all that. But I feel like that you might be able to say, oh, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I'm really overwhelmed with this other thing I'm doing right now, or, oh, that doesn't feel like a good match to me. You might be able to say that. Or maybe you aren't, but at least you were reached out to directly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that the personal approach really helps. For sure.
Yeah.
So can I tell you some stuff that I'm not doing well with?
Yes, what?
Okay. So one thing that I struggle with is, and this it's just in the whole form of leadership in general, but it's the sorry to bother you, no worries if you can't, this might be a stupid question. And it's all this stuff that like I'm saying in memes, but like it's not like I'm on TikTok or anything, but just young people like, we can't do that anymore. And I do it so much. And I'm like, it's the kind of thing that if a student does it to me, I'm like, you don't need to talk like that. You can, but I just can't get over doing the like groveling, apologetic.
That's interesting. I do. I know what you mean. Because I like to say that it's okay if you can't do this thing.
Oh, 100%. And like, I think there was something going around a while ago where like a lot of female students would start a question with, sorry, just before they even say the question. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I do totally do that. And so I feel like there's a line between, and it really bothers me when people are not polite. So there's a line between being polite and then just being like crawling on the ground apologizing.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Because, it is a balance. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like I'm more comfortable with students, like not being mean to them, but not being like, sorry to bother you guys, like that whole thing. But then it just feels so rude to me at times. So anyway, I just need to play around with that. And like you said, I really like your idea of thinking about it as practice and just need to think about what that looks like. I have another two things that one thing is just a question for you.
Okay, what's that?
Using dear versus hi.
Oh, I know.
So sometimes to me, dear feels so formal, it feels out of place. And then hi sometimes feels too cash. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like,
Mad cash.
Mad cash.
Yeah.
Check me out with my young people. Yeah. So I don't know when to use dear. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes...
Yeah. I do tend to use dear in the formal situations.
Yeah.
Like, dear project coordinator at NSF,
Yo, project coordinator at NSF.
But then, if it's my students, if it's my department chair, I would probably say hi. Unless it was some formal situation, like I have to register a complaint or something to...
Oh, God, yeah.
I think then I think it's for the more formal situations.
I'm going to know when you're mad at me. You're like, dear Ruth. And I'm like, oh.
I'm thinking of it as like in Star Trek, where like the higher up group of people are all friends with each other and they use first names. But then if it becomes a formal, we are in command, employee, doing battle stations kind of thing, it becomes back to the titles. So I don't know, I feel like that's a similar thing.
I'm going to use this forever. Like, am I in a battle situation or am I having a cup of Earl Grey tea in the palm room or whatever?
Yeah.
That's perfect.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But then it's also, so it's a degree of formality for me, like...
Yeah.
President of the university, I'll say dear.
Yes, yeah. I think it's just, for some reason, it just doesn't flow, or I don't know, it just always makes me like, but then definitely the hi can be a bit, and I think I remember sharing that at the beginning of the pandemic and virtual instruction, when I was only really interacting with people through email, I went bananas with exclamation points. I'm trying to rein that in now, because I'm like, that time has passed. I need to settle down with the because there was a while like where I would like, hi, exclamation point, blah blah, and it was just like, okay, I need to settle down with that.
I totally know what you mean. Wait, there is another option. There's like, good morning, Ruth, which feels to me like formal but a little more friendly.
Yes, I like that.
So I don't know. I suppose there's other options. Yeah.
I like that one. Yeah, I like that. That's good.
And then what else were you going to say?
I think just working on, again, it's sort of ridiculous to even say this, but until we had a conversation years ago about emails, this hadn't really occurred to me. Like sometimes my emails would just be a stream of consciousness or something, not, and like, yeah. So I think making things actionable is something, like, I guess, like putting in the question mark, but just also, like you said, just having a moment of like, what is it I want out of this? Do you know what I mean? And sometimes it is just, I am letting you know a thing. Do you know what I mean? But a lot of the time it's like, I do want a response from this.
Sometimes it's, I'm letting you know a thing and here's the response I want, Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And, there's people, and when I get an email like that, it's such a relief because you're just like, okay, I can deal with this, or I know how to, you know what I mean? It's just so much easier than sometimes you're like, and what? Like, I don't understand what I need to do. So yeah, I think that it's so weird now. I'm kind of going on this whole mental path of like emails evolving from, because when I, again, because I'm so old, like you would have pen pals that you would write to.
Oh, yes, I had that.
And then email just became a way of replacing that. Do you know what I mean? And then it's like, no. And I was talking to someone the other day because they were asking me about when I was at the university that I'm at. And I was like, yeah, we didn't have email, or I had email and they would check it once a month. Do you know what I mean? And I was kind of like, how did we know anything? Do you know what I mean? Like, how did we know?
What was the communication? Yeah, totally.
Right. Like, how did I know where to go on the first day? Or like how, and I guess you got a letter in the mail and it had information on it and you had a paper map, and it just feels wild when you're thinking about it now. But yeah, like in terms of assigning tasks, and it's a whole different thing. And I think I'm not conscious of it enough.
And I think maybe part of the confusion is that all these things are integrated. You can have your pen pal on email, but you're also getting the information about how to start the school year on email, and you're also emailing the president, and you're also emailing your students, and it's just all these different settings are all within email. Like, I'm going to put emojis if I'm emailing you, but I'm not going to do that most of the time if I'm emailing my students.
I know. I feel like I've got such poor emoji game. I feel like I'm going to accidentally say something inappropriate and I won't know.
I know.
Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I don't know what the young people mean by whatever emojis. So it's a risky business. But
so often I want to use the upside down smiley face, but then I Google what it means and I'm like, I'm not quite sure if I understand. I better not use it.
I don't know what that. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So I think just a bit of consciousness about, and then also, man, like just like entreaty to the world, please, like there's too many emails that we might not need to have.
Well, that's another thing about explicitly figuring out what you want of people. Maybe you don't actually need to send an email. Maybe you just need to email 2 of them who are the ones you actually needed to communicate with, or maybe you can cut out half of it because some of it was stuff you just wanted. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like thinking about explicitly what the goal is, I think, can cut down on the amount of time with emails for sure, but can also cut down on the number of emails potentially. Right. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, actually, I just need to email so-and-so, and then we'll figure that out, and then we don't need to email the whole department or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's just, there's so much email, it's so hard sometimes to filter through what is actually relevant and what you really want to read. So yeah. I guess then knowing that all the things we can do to design an email that is like the forwarding and being like, I thought you might be interested in this because blah, blah, blah. Like that's so important.
Yeah. And then I suppose also just choosing who you're emailing to. Like part of the reason there's so many emails is because they're sent to the whole university. And, and that makes sense. I can see that some places would need to do that. But when I'm sending an email, I can try to target it as much as possible. Yeah,
totally. Well, this is perfect, and thank you. I feel like you brought this idea into my head, and now you've refreshed it again. So.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, it feels like the kind of thing that, one of those things that just needs to be revisited frequently to keep it in mind.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.